Kamala Harris, displaying the same sort of political savvy that got her drummed out of the 2020 presidential primary without winning a single delegate, made one of the most boneheaded decisions I've seen in recent politics, and her presidential campaign is less than 3 weeks old. Picking Tim Waltz for VP is the chef's kiss of stupidity, but when the other top contender for the job comes from a certain ancient tribe rhyming with Lou, then Harris really had no choice. Tim Waltz is a Bernie Sanders socialist without that Jewish accent that Democrats hate. Tampon Tim is a pick that manages to alienate the most people without appealing to anyone in the center. He is a terrible governor. He let cities burn during the Black Lives Matter riots. He's pushed an extremely far-left transgender agenda, say that 5 times fast, and he keeps lying about his military service. So thank you, Kamala, for trying to lose an election the corporate press seems to want to hand you on a platter. Reporters can keep trying to make fetch happen, but the second that Kamala has to show any true competence, she fails miserably. I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Okay, so today on the podcast, we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about Tim Walz being tagged for the VP slot. We're going to do a little bit of the stock market crash, and then we're going to celebrate Cori Bush losing her job. But before all that, we have our favorite comment from the last video. At Paul Begley 1464 said, "Don't forget illegal aliens for Kamala and drug lords for Kamala, and then there are the mentally ill for Kamala." You know, Paul, it is true that even though I forgot to mention them, I'm sure Kamala won't forget the most important part of her constituency, which is the degenerates. So, yes, Paul, I'm sure she's looking to reach out to them, even if I failed to mention them in the video. The first thing we're going to talk about today is going to be Tim Walz. And I know what many people are saying, which is, who the hell is Tim Walz? Nobody knows this guy. No one cares about this guy. He looks like if Mr. Potato Head was, if they cut the potato in half so it only had the white part, that's what Tim Walz looks like. He's got a face that is so forgettable. He could be anyone else. He kind of looks like Bernie Sanders, but this is going to sound weird. He looks like an uglier Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, whatever it is about him, you know, he kind of looks like Larry David, Bernie Sanders, they're ancient cousins. He looks like the third cousin who probably 2 generations beforehand dealt with some inbreeding. That's kind of what Tim Walz looks like. He's a very forgettable person. There's nothing special about him. He hasn't appeared to do anything overly special in his entire life from the deep dive I've done this week into him. Why was he picked for VP? He is a terrible choice. He was a terrible pick. But as we said in the intro, this is what Kamala Harris does. She makes bad decisions. It's what she's always done. She has run garbage political campaigns her entire life. She's won them. It's true. So in the overall thing, she's won a lot of her elections. But let's not forget, ever since she was running for DA of San Francisco, she has run terrible campaigns. She had the largest fine in California history for ethics violations during her campaign for San Francisco DA. Think about how badly you have to do to violate ethics grounds in California to the extent that she did for a local race. Okay? This is ridiculous. She's a terrible campaigner. She makes bad decisions because she's not bright. That's really the meat of it. She's not a bright person. She makes bad choices. Okay? So Tim Walz, terrible pick. It does nothing to help her campaign. He is the idea in an election. You have a primary. In the primary, you're running against people from your party. So if I'm a Democrat, imagine I'm Kamala Harris. In the primary, I want to out-Democrat the Democrats. That's my goal. I want to be more progressive. I want to seem like I represent more boxes in the Democratic Party. So what people often say is that you swing towards the base in a primary and you swing towards the middle in a general election. This is what people do. This is not doing a good job of that. Tim Walz does not swing you back towards the middle. Tim Walz swings you farther left. So what you're doing is you're doubling down on the base. You're doubling down on the idea that you only need to win progressives and Democrats. This is a terrible campaign strategy. It could work. And if she wins, it people will say, well, you were wrong, but I'm not wrong. Because even if she wins, it's still a bad strategy. It's not that she couldn't win. She can win if only Democrats show up to vote. This is going to be a truism no matter who she picks as her vice president. But the idea is you want to make it easy to vote for you and difficult to vote for your opponent. Picking someone like Tim Walz doesn't make it easier to vote for her or harder. Well, he has a track record. When you dig into his track record, he didn't just, as Kamala Harris would like to say, he didn't just fall out of a coconut tree. All right, this guy's got a past. He has a history. He has said things. He has done things that are divisive and alienate people in the middle of the country. I would never vote for Tim Walz. I'm a person who, just this past week, we'll get into this later, I voted for a Democrat in the Democratic primary here in St. Louis because I could, because he's someone I would disagree with, but I could vote for him because he's not a crazy person. Tim Walz comes across like a crazy person. He has done numerous things that we're going to get into that are terrible. So this pick is a bad choice. You could have picked somebody in the middle, someone who might share your values, might share your vision, but appeals to people in the middle, because politics is the art of perception. Politics is about how you are perceived. As much as it is about what you do and what you say, it is about how people see you, which is why if it was the case that Joe Biden could still be an effective executive, if he could still be an effective president, it wouldn't matter. Because the perception, the public perception is all that matters. And the public perceives him as too far gone and too demented. So even if which I believe that is the case, but even if it wasn't, even if he was back there being incredibly effective at his job, which he's not, but if he was, it wouldn't matter because the public has turned and the perception is that he's old. Well, the perception on some of the candidates that Kamala Harris could have chosen for VP is that they're more centrist, that they are more mainstream, and that they appeal to a broader base. But for reasons we'll go into, she couldn't pick them. One of the guys, this Josh Shapiro, who is the governor of Pennsylvania, well, he would have been a strong pick. He would have been a very effective pick because he's Jewish. And because of that, it gives her some credibility. The Jewish vote that is going to go to the Republican Party is probably going to be the largest that has ever been in history. The Jewish people tend to vote Democrat. Now, you're more conservative, you're more Orthodox Jews, they vote Republican. But the majority of Jewish people who are just ethnically Jewish or don't take religion that seriously, they are very liberal. They vote Democrat. We're going to see the largest percentage of the Jewish population that voted Republican ever in this election. And so a Josh Shapiro pick would have been a smart move. Pennsylvania is a swing state. It is a state that Kamala Harris needs to win this election, and he is very popular in that state. But she couldn't pick Shapiro. The state that Tim Walz is from, Minnesota, it hasn't been competitive in decades. Ronald Reagan won 49 states in 1984. He didn't even win Minnesota. Minnesota's the one state that doesn't vote for Republicans, okay? So it does nothing to help her in that regard. She needs to win Pennsylvania. Josh Shapiro possibly could have pushed her over the edge and carried her through in that state, but she couldn't pick him. Why? Because he's Jewish. There's no other reason. That's the reason. She couldn't pick him because he is Jewish, and that's how far to the left she needs to cater to win. This is what she is doing. This is where she thinks she's going. She is going to swing hard to the left because the pro-Hamas caucus that is in her party will not vote for a Jew. That's how bad the anti-Semitism is in the Democratic Party today. Kamala Harris needs to win Pennsylvania, and she couldn't pick the Jew to help her because her party does not care for the Jewish people. So Josh Shapiro, unfortunately, is out. His position, by the way, on Israel is very similar to Tim Walz's position. This is what everyone's been reporting this week. Everyone said, well, you can't say it's Israel. You can't say it's because Josh Shapiro is more of a hardline pro-Israel Zionist. It's not true. He used to be more of that, but he's not. His position has reflected Tim Walz. The only reason he is not picked today is because his last name is Shapiro. That's it. And that just is it's demonstrative of the fact that Kamala Harris will cater to the radical left. She is not going to stand up to her party. She's an empty suit that is just there to foment the farthest left, most progressive, most radical agenda that we've ever seen. She's bad at this, too. She's just as bad at it. It's a terrible choice. You could have picked Josh Shapiro. And all the people who say, well, we're not going to vote for him because he's a Zionist, what are they going to do? Are they going to vote Republican? You think that they're going to vote for Donald Trump, the most pro-Israel, pro-Jewish president in the history of the United States? No. They're either not going to vote or they're going to vote for you. They're going to swallow their pride. They're going to say they're not going to vote, and then they're going to vote for you. Oh, but in Michigan, in Dearborn, Michigan, we got to cater to these people. No, you don't. No, you don't. I understand Michigan's a swing state. Pennsylvania's a swing state. People in Pennsylvania would have voted for you. You need to win Pennsylvania, and you couldn't do it. Tim Walz is a bad pick for all those reasons just listed, but let's go into what about him as a person. As I just said, he has a history. He didn't just come out of thin air. I know the rest of us don't know that he existed until 5 minutes ago, but he didn't just pop up. She didn't snap her fingers and then conjure him from thin air. He has done and said things that if I'm Donald Trump, if I'm in charge of the campaign, I have ideas. All you do, this is it. You take all the money that you have, you dump it into advertisement in all these states, you buy billboards. People don't watch ads all the time. Old people do who vote. So you put ads on TV, you put ads on the radio, you put ads on billboards. Everyone drives, everyone sees billboards. And all you do is quote the radicalism that these people have said, that have come out of their mouth, and you just let them speak for themselves. Tim Walz is the guy who said just last week, one person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. He's a guy, he embraces the title of socialist. Do you know how much of a political turnoff that is to anyone over the age of 25? It is incredible that all you have to do is just play it. Just play the clip of him saying that. He is calling himself a socialist. Okay, that is disqualifying to most Americans. Play that. Let them be known that he thinks of himself that way. He describes himself as a progressive, not a Democrat, not a liberal, as a progressive. Let's not forget that during the Black Lives Matter riots, Waltz, he is responsible for a lot of the destruction that happened. Minneapolis got hit as hard as any other city in the country, probably worse than most. He is responsible for this. He received a call that said, we need 600 troops on the ground. We don't have enough security. This is getting out of hand. We need help. He waited an extra day to even activate the National Guard, which then took another day to get on scene. He waited 2 days worth of rioting to get anyone in control of the situation. When he mobilized them, he realized it took longer. Well, he was in the National Guard. He knows how this stuff works. He did this for a long time, and yet he pretends that he didn't understand how the mobilization was going to take time. Okay, well, what about all the pro-Black Lives Matter stuff where you're saying, oh, I understand all the pent-up rage and blah, blah, blah. You're giving an out to people who are violent and rioted and burned down buildings. That's on Tim Walz. It's not on the mayor of Minneapolis who commands a couple hundred police officers. No, it's on Tim Walz who has the entire National Guard at his disposal. This city burned for days and days and days. It was the governor himself who got on the radio, Tim Walz himself, who got on the radio and told officers, and I think the quote is, let it go. When the 3rd precinct, a police precinct in Minneapolis, was under attack, he told officers on the radio to abandon the police station to the rioters. Just give it to them. And then it was subsequently burned to the ground. Let's show a little link here. Look at this. There's an actual Wikipedia page. Thank Wikipedia for all the good that they do. Oh, actually, we want this thing. Nope, that's not right either. This guy right here. Okay. So this is on the... There's actually a specific entry for arson damage during the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So let's scroll down here. We can see a couple things. So the FBI and the ATF said 164 structure fires occurred from May 27th to May 30th, 2020 during the George Floyd riots. We scroll down here. Many of the impacted structures were destroyed with some being reduced to piles of rubble after collapsing. And when they say many, look at this. We scroll down. So there's a list. Here we go. All of the structure fires. Let's scroll through this. I'm going to have to scroll very quickly so you can understand. For those of you just listening, just imagine an endless page of scrolling as they identify all the buildings that were burned to the ground. Look at this list. Tim Walz, this is what he did when he's in charge. You want to talk about law and order? You want to talk about crime and punishment? You want to talk about safety and law abiding? Well, the governor couldn't stop his most major city in his state from burning to the ground. Hundreds of buildings. Look at this. Look at the list. We're scrolling all the way down. We're still scrolling. We're just scrolling, looking at them all burned. We'll just stop. I want to stop at the, actually, I think it's back here. Right there. Here it is. Minneapolis Police Department, 3rd Precinct, 3000 Minnehaha Avenue. It says here on the side. Okay, so it's built in the 1950s. On the evening, May 26th, the station building was destroyed by fire after being overrun by rioters and torched. On May 28th, after police retreated from the area, facing opposition to returning to the building, the city council approved a plan. Oh, and then it says they're going to rebuild it. So he abandoned this. He abandoned this police department, and look at what it looks like now. Here's a picture. Just imagine, if you're listening, a burned out shell of a building. This is where the police were housed, okay? This is not some random building. This is not the 7-Eleven down the street from my house that got burned to the ground. This is a police precinct that the governor ordered troops to abandon to protesters so they could burn it to the ground. That's Tim Walz on Law and Order. That's Tim Walz. Oh, he acknowledged. People will say, oh, he later acknowledged that he did a bad job. Okay, I don't care. Because when it counted, you know what people said? They said that the governor froze. He was indecisive. He didn't know what to do. Not to mention the fact that his own daughter leaked National Guard movement patterns to protesters. Oh, we're just going to forget about that. She was never charged with anything. How did she find out this information? She managed to alert protesters via Twitter that National Guard National Guard troops were not going to be deployed to certain areas of the city on certain dates. She let people know this. Well, where was she getting the information from? Obviously, her father. She's just some kid. She's not involved in politics. She wasn't in there, but she got to know what was happening, and she got to advise rioters on how to riot more effectively. It's ridiculous. Bad. Let's move on. What about number 2 on my big list of reasons Tim Walz is a terrible pick? You might have noticed in the intro, the name Tampon Tim. Where the hell does that come from? Well, he had a bill that he passed. It's not controversial, the first part of it. It's a bill that says in public schools that you should supply tampons in the female restrooms. You say, okay, I have no problem with this. That's good. To help supply women with whatever products they need in the bathroom for their menstrual cycle. Okay, I have no issues. If you want to talk about that, whether or not schools should do it, fine. No one cares. People are pretending that that's the controversy. It's not. The fact is that he then made it so that it's not for women. It's not for women when they have their period. It was for people who menstruate, and he decided that also the tampons should be located in the boys' restrooms. So starting in elementary school, there are tampon dispensers in the boys' restrooms in Minnesota. This is silly. It's stupid stuff like this that makes people not think Democrats are serious, because the idea of quote-unquote people who menstruate is so dumb that there are so many trans individuals, female to male, that we have to put tampons in all the boys' restrooms because we're going to accommodate this fraction of a percentage of confused individuals who menstruate and want to use a men's restroom. Nonsense. It's nonsense, and it's silly, and by itself, it's probably not a big deal, but this is also around the time that he made Minnesota a sanctuary state for teen castration. They like to use the term gender-affirming care. I like to use the term teen castration because that's what you're talking about. You're talking about if a boy, without the permission of his parents, wants to travel to Minnesota and have his dick and balls just lopped off, Tim Walz says, fine with me, why don't you come on by? This is something that I think most normal people are going to disapprove of. You're saying without the the guidance, without the parental consent, a child can come and be put on puberty blockers in your state because you're a sanctuary state for teen castration. A child can come, like I said, and have a lop it off of me performed and go from male to female in your state at the age of 14 without parental guidance, without parental permission. They can do that in Minnesota because of a bill Tim Walz signed. Not something that appeals to Midwesterners. Everyone's pretending that Tim Walz, everyone in the corporate press at least, is pretending that Tim Walz appeals to the Midwestern sensibility. No, he doesn't. He's not. There's nothing about this man that's working class, blue collar, that most people in the Rust Belt are going to understand. He's not that person. Like I said, he is Bernie Sanders without the accent. That is all he is. He is as progressive and radical as you can get. As it's been pointed out many times this week, he also is a liar. If it's not a lie explicitly, it's a lie by implication. He has presented himself as something that he is not, which is a war hero. He lied about his military record. He spoke about carrying weapons in war. He said something before about, this is like, these weapons that we have on the street, they're like the weapons I carried in war and blah, blah, blah. He was in the National Guard. This is true. For 24 or 26 years, long time, he was in the National Guard. So that's great. National Guard's awesome. But he has lied about his deployment. He has made it sound like he was deployed to combat zones. He's done things. When they found out that he was going to get orders to be deployed to Iraq, he retired. He ran away from his platoon. This isn't me, by the way, saying this. This is members of his platoon who said this, that they knew that they were going to get deployed. And instead of deploying with his men, he retired from the National Guard. You can say whatever you want. I can't imagine a person who would think that that is appropriate to do. I don't care how long you've been in. If I'm told, hey, Tyler, you're going to, which, by the way, people are saying, well, he didn't know. It's bullshit. This is not the way it works. You know you're going to be deployed much longer than the official order comes down. That's the way it works in the military. Most of the time, you get the pre-announcement first, so the word will come down from the chain of command, hey, just so you know, you're going to get orders in 6 months that you're going to deploy 6 months after that. So you might know up to a year in advance sometimes, 9 months, a year in advance that you're going to deploy. His unit was going to deploy to Iraq. He knew it was going to deploy, and rather than go, he retired. Many people in his unit have called him out for this. He also has said things like, when he was talking about his unit went to Iraq. Oh, what a tricky turn of phrase you're using there, Tim Walz, because when you say your unit went to Iraq, it sounds like you went to Iraq, doesn't it? Oh, but then you get to say, no, I never said that. My unit went. Now, your unit went without you after you retired, but you didn't go to Iraq. You didn't carry a weapon of war. He is doing what is called stolen valor. It's not that he wasn't in the National Guard. He was, but he has misrepresented what he did in the National Guard and to make himself seem more heroic than he is. And I find that kind of stuff I find it despicable. The idea that you're going to, it's great. You're in the National Guard. Just be in the National Guard. You don't also have to be a war hero. Most people in the military are not war heroes. Most people in the military do a job. I think less than 1% of people in the military see combat. There's nothing wrong with being in the military and never being in combat. It doesn't mean you weren't deployed. It doesn't mean you didn't have to go through hardships. It doesn't mean you didn't sacrifice. Everyone does. But the idea that you're going to represent yourself as some sort of combat veteran hero when you weren't is kind of gross and kind of seedy. But that's also who Tim Walz is. Tim Walz was arrested in 1996, I believe it's 1996, for drunk driving. And during his drunk driving arrest, he pretended to be deaf. He used that as an excuse that why he couldn't follow the officer's instruction is because he had a hard time hearing, because he was deaf. That's who he is. He's a guy who drives too fast, drinks too much, blew a 0.128, I think, like a ridiculously high number. And then instead of saying, oh, I messed up, owning his mistake, pretended that he couldn't hear, and that's why he couldn't understand the officer's instructions. So Tim Walz, a bad choice. Bad choice all around. Bad governor, bad I don't want to say bad person, but he's clearly done some rather questionable things in his life. Probably, don't know the rest about his personal history, but I know that in public, he has done some things that I disapprove of. But we're going to move on. We could talk about Tim Walz all day, and we probably will talk about him quite a bit up until November, when hopefully we never have to talk about him again. And let's move on for topic number 2. We're going to talk about the stock market. Woo, the stock market. Hooray, everyone's favorite. We're talking about the economy. Who doesn't love numbers and math? Isn't it fun? Well, this week, the Dow tumbled more than 1,000 points, and the broader market on a whole was down 3%. This was on Monday. The NASDAQ fell 3.5% as well. And the NASDAQ is the one it's really full of a lot of tech, which is one of the reasons why it was down so much, is because a lot of the tech companies have fallen. The AI bubble is close to bursting, I believe. So we're seeing a drop. Now, a lot of this came back later in the week, but the Japanese stocks, the Japanese market, also fell off a cliff, did a 12% dive, which is the worst in its history. And then all of the major Asian and European markets also fell. So what we had this week was a global dip that was very, very troubling. And why did this happen? It's a hard question to assess. Why did this happen? The easy answer is that investors are worried about a recession. The recession that is coming. I hate to tell you, it's coming. And when investors worry about recession, the market dives. That's just the way it goes. And they're worried for a number of reasons, but one of which is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that the U.S. economy added 114,000 jobs in July, which is much lower than it was expected to be. And this is a pattern of the Biden economy, that the job reports always come out and they look good, they look promising, and then the actual numbers are released and everyone goes, oh, that's not anywhere near what they said it was going to be. And the market goes like this. It goes, woo, and it does this little dive because they go, well, that's weird. Strange that the Biden administration seems to be lying about their job numbers, and that's not good. So they didn't add as many jobs, and the unemployment rate went up to 4.3%. Now, basically, without going into a deep dive on how the economy works, we can summarize most of it by saying the Federal Reserve is terrible. The idea that the economy is going to be a slave to Jerome Powell and the rates set by the Federal Reserve chair is a joke. This is no way to run a coherent system, especially when the rate cuts are notoriously bad at their timing. Historically, they have done a bad job at mitigating recession and depression. They do a terrible job of it. They do a bad job combating inflation. They do a bad job avoiding recession and depression. They're just not good at what they're supposed to do. So what we should have done, what Jerome Powell should have done and couldn't do, is that if you want to stop inflation, he was going to have to hike those rates way up, way faster than he did. You should have had a gigantic jump in the rates 2 or 3 years ago. And the reason why they didn't do it is because the market would have had a shock. We would have had a dive. We would have gone into a slight recession, but it would have stopped inflation. It would have, because inflation, what is inflation? In the most basic sense, inflation is too much money chasing too few goods and services. So when you have too much money in the economy and not enough stuff to go around, the price of the stuff is going to go up. And you can run into an inflationary spiral in a lot of ways, because maybe you have some inflation and so everything's more expensive. So people come to their employers and say, I need a raise because everything's more expensive. So then the employees give you a raise, and then you have more money. So then more money enters the economy and you have more money chasing the same amount of stuff. And then you say, well, the prices go up again to reflect that because demand is up, but the supply is still low. So prices go up and then wages go up, and then prices go up and then wages go up. And what you wind up in is the wages don't match the price inflation for everybody. And you wind up with this inflationary spiral where inflation has now gone up. Overall wages are stagnant or worse. They're worse off. And you have everything is more expensive. And so that's what was going on 3 years ago. We've been there. And instead of what you should do, which is you need to take money out of the economy, and you do that by raising the rates so that people don't take loans, they don't pour money into the economy to do things, and everyone suffers a little bit, but then it gets better. And that's the way. It's not a pleasant fix, but it is a fix. And they didn't want to do that. And why didn't we do that? Because it would have made Joe Biden look bad, because we would have immediately gone into a recession the second that he started us down this inflationary path. And they didn't want to do that because making Biden look bad is not the job of the Federal Reserve. They don't want to make the president look bad, which is a terrible way to run the system. So what you're trying to do, if you're the Federal Reserve Chair, is keep your job and not make the president look bad. But that shouldn't be your priority. Your priority shouldn't be how Joe Biden's poll numbers look. Your priority should be fixing the economy, and it never is, because they work for the president, and the president is the one who decides whether they get to keep their job or not. So it's silly, but that's where we are. We didn't do this. Instead, what they did was they aimed for the soft landing. The soft landing, which prolonged inflation and has made our economy look okay, decent on paper, but we're not back. We never came back from COVID. That's the truth of it. It might feel that way because the stock market is up and it's at record highs and everyone's making money, but not really. It's not the way it works. Look at the savings that people have been accumulating in the last couple of years. It's not the same. The people who are in the stock market heavy are doing okay because the stock market goes up. So people like me, with money in the stock market, with money to save and money to spend, I'm doing okay because my money's good. But what about the people who don't have that? What about the people who are on the lower end of the economic spectrum? Well, they're being forgotten about, and they've never come back because they don't care about the stock market because that's not where their money is. Their money's paycheck to paycheck. Their money is in the $5,000 they have in the bank. It's not in the retirement accounts that they're looking at and saying, oh, well, in 30 years I'll be fine. No. It's happening today, and today they're worse off. But we don't look at them on paper because they're not on paper because they don't have any money. So people don't look at them and say, oh, look, the economy's bad because this guy who works as a delivery driver doesn't have enough money to buy bread. They say all the people with their retirement accounts are doing great. Look at the stock market. Look at the stock market. The stock market's not the economy. It's an indicator of the economy, but it doesn't tell you how regular Americans are doing. And so we've never come back from COVID because of that. We never have. And we won't for a long time. And we especially won't when inflation is still at 3% when it's supposed to be at 2%. I think inflation should be 0%. But if we're going to aim for something, 2% is where it is. We're 50% higher than that still. It's not a victory. We're still incredibly high on the inflationary cycle. It just doesn't seem that way because we're not at 10 or 8%. We're still at 3. 3 is bad. 3 is a bad number. And the government spending is still rampant. It's still running up. And as long as government keeps printing money, inflation is going to get worse. That's the way it works. The only way you have inflation, don't listen to what anyone else says. Anyone else who says anything else is one of two things. They are lying or they're mistaken. There's no other option. They're one of those two things if they say anything other than what I'm about to say right here. Inflation is caused by one thing and one thing only, the government printing money. That's it. It's the only thing that causes inflation. You can say it's corporate greed. You can say it's this. You can say it's that. It's not true. The inflation is caused from one factor, the government printing money. And when the government prints more money and puts more money in circulation, it's going to devalue your currency. All the money you have in your bank, all the money you have in your retirement account is worth less. It's very easy to think about. And actually, we can do a little experiment right here. Okay. Imagine this. I have a pencil. This pencil right here is all the money in the economy, and I own it. So what does that mean? That means I'm wealthy because I own everything. All the money in the economy is in this pencil right here, and so you can get part of it, and you can get part of it, and this guy takes the eraser, and this guy takes this little metal bit, and this guy files off some of the shavings. So everyone's got a piece of this pencil floating around. Well, this pencil's 100%. Okay? 100% of all the money is located right here. Well, the government comes along, and then they make this pencil. What does that mean? Well, that means there's two pencils. That means there's double the amount of pencil out there in the world, double the amount of money. So if I own this pencil, and then this pencil comes along, well, I owned 100%. Now I own 50%. Well, what does that mean? That means my pencil is worth half of what it was because it used to be all of it, and now it's half of it. And then they come along and they print this pencil. Well, now my money's worth a third because I had all of it, but now there's two over here that didn't exist, and so now I only own a third. And then they print this pencil. And now my money's worth a quarter of what it was before because I had all of it. But now there's so much more money out here that everyone's got some. So everyone's got some money that can pay everybody and do all these things. And all this money that I thought I had that was safe in my bank account, all this money that I've been saving up and I've been thrifty and I've been avoiding this and I've been just saving it and foregoing all these luxuries, all that money that I thought was safe in the bank, it's not. Because the government, if they keep making pencils, if they keep printing money, every dollar that's printed makes this dollar I have over here worth less money. And it's that simple. The government prints more money and devalues our currency, and it is the tax that you don't notice. Because every day you look at your bank account, every day you look at the stock market, and you say, oh, my money's fine. My money's staying the same. My money's going up. It's good. Oh, the stock market dipped a little. That's fine because I know it'll go back up. But every day, the government is printing so much money, you can't comprehend it. You don't understand that you are paying a tax every single day of your life in the way of inflation. And the reason why this is because of the Federal Reserve and the loose monetary policy that has caused this inflationary cycle. The stock market is going to dip. It rebounded this week. It did. But we had a dip. And everyone said, why do we have this dip? Because a recession is looming. That's my prediction. My prediction is we are going to have a recession. And if we're going to have a recession, then that means everyone's going to lose money and things are going to get a little bad. And they need to. That's also my prescription. My prescription would be if I was in charge of the Fed, first of all, if I was in charge of the Fed, I'd dismantle the whole building because it's a useless institution that's no good. But if I was in charge of it and had to run it, then I would say, we got to crank up the rates. We should have done it 3 years ago. Let's do it now. Crank them up. And everyone's going to hate that. Everyone's going to hate it, and everyone's going to hate you for doing it. But you need to do it to fix the inflation, which is actually the problem in the economy right now. So without fixing inflation, we're going into a recession. And if we fix inflation, we're probably going to go into a recession. But the recession would be a little bit more controlled because we take inflation off the table. So the numbers, whatever they are, they wouldn't be being manipulated by taking inflation into account. Oh, wages are up. Well, real wages are down. The fact that wages are up doesn't mean anything because real wages, what they do is they measure that against the value of the dollar. They're down. So we'd even this out. We'd even the score, get the scales back to zero, and then you can figure it out. But you can't figure it out as long as you're in this inflationary spiral. 3% is not a good number. It's 50% higher. I know people don't think in numbers like that because 3 is a small number, and it seems fine. But if the goal is 2 and you're at 3, you are 50% away from the mark. You are failing. I'm shooting an arrow at the target and it's not that I'm missing the bullseye. I'm barely hitting the board. Okay? So that's what the Federal Reserve has been doing for the last 3 years. And it was much worse. Before I was shooting at the target and somehow the arrow wound up behind me. That's how bad they were before. But now I'm shooting the target and I'm hitting the board 3%. It's not that I'm not hitting the board, but I'm not close to where I need to be. We're going into a recession. This is bad. It's bad for the economy, and it's definitely going to be bad for Kamala Harris. And it's not that I want this. It's just that I think it's the fix. That's the fix that needs to happen. And it's unfortunate, but it is true. On to more cheerful news. Because inflation, talking about the economy, I'm skeptical that we are actually at a good place. And obviously that's true. So I want to talk about some cheerful news. And my cheerful news, the good news for the week, is that Cori Bush is jobless. This is fantastic news. Let's hold on. Let's go to our very important cheers and applause button. Oh, there it is. Listen to that crowd roar. We got Cori Bush out there. She's jobless. She's going to contribute to the rise in the unemployment numbers next month. And we are here at the Chrestman Conversation, and I, myself, Tyler Chrestman, the host and greatest podcaster alive, we are happy here that Cori Bush is out of the job. She was one of the worst, if not the worst, members in Congress. And the fact that she represented me in Congress was an embarrassment to me and my city. So hopefully This is the last time we ever have to discuss her, and she'll fade away into obscurity or whatever sort of place that people with trashy chest tattoos wind up. We're glad to see her go, and we won't miss her when she leaves, and that's that. We are going to wish Wesley Bell good luck. I voted for him, and like I said, he is a Democrat that I could vote for. He seems, I will admit, 100%. I do not know everything about the man. I don't know all of his policies. I don't know everything about him, but I know from the interviews I've watched with him, he can think on his feet. He speaks well. And when you look at his policies, he's a Democrat. He's liberal. He does all this stuff. And I say, okay, that's fine. But he seems like a guy who at least understands that there's another side. I don't know. Maybe he'll be terrible. Maybe he'll be just as bad. It is an incredibly low bar for him to clear, but you never know. But right now, we wish him luck. If Kamala Harris wins the presidency, I will do the same thing. I will wish her luck. I want all these people to do well. If you're a Democrat, I want you to do well because I want the country to do well. I want St. Louis to do well. And if Wesley Bell is going to represent St. Louis, we wish him the best. When he does wrong, we're going to call him out. When he does right, we'll give him props. It's the way it works here. Last week on the podcast, I gave AOC props. Everyone knows I make fun of AOC constantly. She's my age. I'm not picking on some kid. She is my age. So when you talk about her being some young woman, she's not. She's 34 years old, okay? I made fun of her quite a bit on this podcast because I don't think she has good ideas, and I think she does a lot of bad things. But last week we gave her props because she did something good. When Wesley Bell does something good, we'll give him props. And when he does something bad, we'll call him out because that's the way it is. We call balls and strikes. We don't make up the news. We just report on it. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for the week. We're hitting about 40 minutes, which is the time we have to spend together every week. And as always, questions, comments, concerns, like, share, subscribe, all the good things. I want to hear about all of it, good and bad. This last week was pretty fun. I realized on YouTube, I don't know why this is. If you go to when I was on YouTube, I'm supposed to get notifications when people comment or say something on my videos, which I do sometimes, so I would respond to them. Well, I noticed that I went into the YouTube studio and found that there were a bunch of comments that I never saw that on these videos that people were commenting and I never saw. So I'm making more of an effort I'm going to check that now because I don't know why I'm not getting notification. I couldn't figure that out. And instead, I'm going to try and respond to comments on there. So I had some fun ones this last week. Some people out there. What I would say is just you need to relax in life, people. All right, you need to not take things so seriously, and don't be mean on the internet. My goodness, how difficult is it to? I get it. I'm a host of a show. You can say whatever you like. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but to go on to random people on the internet just to criticize them is such a weird thing to do. I criticize a lot of people who are in the public eye. You're a politician. It's basically part of your job to be criticized. I'm not asking people not to criticize me. I just find it fascinating. Like, I'm not rude to people online as a rule. I try not to be. I do not name call. I don't use ad hominems or pejoratives. I don't do those things online because I think it represents something I'm not trying to represent here on the podcast. So I always find it fascinating when people just want to come on and be mean. I'm not asking you not to do it. I just find it fascinating. It's kind of funny. And again, the internet's not real to me. So all the praise is great. All the insults are fine. None of it goes to my head. Don't let the nice things that people say go to your head. And don't let the negative things that people say go to your heart. That's always the way that you should treat the internet. The internet's not real. The people you know who are your friends on the internet, yeah, okay, they're a little bit real. But random people you don't know, don't let them influence your life, good or bad. Don't let them make you think you're the best, and don't let them make you think you're the worst, okay? Don't let these people in at all. It's just a good rule of thumb. Anyway, so I'm going to respond to comments on there. So if I've not seen your comment or didn't respond to something you said, I wasn't trying to ignore you. I just wasn't getting notifications. I think we've rectified that problem. So let's see them. Let's see some good comments this week and have some fun. Anyway, I'll catch you guys next week. Have a good one.